There are people that think Tibb al-Nabawi, that we have to follow Tibb al-Nabawi. The prophetic medicine was the medicine of the Arabian Peninsula at the time. And this idea that that medicine is what we should be practicing today, we certainly, if the Prophet did it, or if he told us to do it, there's benefit in it, undeniably. And Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah said a lot of the prophetic medicine works to the degree with which you have faith in it. So this is what they would call in the West placebo effect, because people, when they have a strong faith in something, they can actually derive benefit from it just by that faith. So we know that's true. And I think it's a mistake not to use placebo on people. I think there's a lot of benefit in it. And they've proven that placebo can be very effective, but they consider it unethical to do that for people now. They used to do it, but now they consider it unethical. That's another matter. But the point is that the Prophet ﷺ, Ibn Khaldun said he did not come to teach us medicine, although within his religion are the principles of medicine. So for instance, the Quran says, "Kulu washrabu wa la tusrifu, innahu la yuhibbul musrifin." Eat and drink, but not to excess, because God does not love those who are excessive. When one of the Greek physicians heard that verse, he said, "Ma taraka nabiyukum shay'an li jalinus." Your prophet didn't leave anything for Galen. Because Hippocrates and Galen said all of illness begins in the stomach. National Institute for Health in the United States said 80% of ailments in the United States are diet. The Prophet ﷺ relates from Al-Harith al-Kadada, one of the great physicians of the Arabian Peninsula, the famous statement that's attributed to the Prophet as a hadith, "Al-ma'idatu baytu da, wa lahimyatu ra'su dawa." The stomach is the seat of disease, and regime, diet, is the foundation of health. Now we know now, forks over knives, that much of the ailments that are afflicting people can be treated and cured by altering diet. Simple as that. So that was a principle that the Prophet ﷺ gave us. He fasted. He cleansed. I mentioned yesterday in Sahih Bukhari, Aisha said that he used to use senna to evacuate entirely his bowels every year. So he did a type of what they would call now a detox fast or a cleansing. The Prophet ﷺ did that as a practice, and that's mentioned in the hadith. So there's benefit in that, to do that, undeniably. But if you have diabetes and the Quran says honey is a shifa, and your doctor said don't use the honey, you have to listen to the doctor there. It's not that the honey's not a shifa, but even some cures are poisons for other people. So this is where the intellect becomes very important, and there's people that will utilize. I saw a man in Medina who's a close friend of mine, and I noticed that he had a basal cell carcinoma on his eye. And I told him, I said, "When did that happen?" And he said, "Recently." And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm putting honey on it and black seed." And I said, "No, you have to go to a doctor immediately." And alhamdulillah, he did, and he got cured of it. But that's an example where we're not using our intelligence, because the Prophet ﷺ would not promote that. There's great strides have been made in medicine, and that we have to use what we've been given. It's a blessing from Allah. Antibiotics are one of the greatest blessings that has ever been bestowed on humanity. Many of us would not be here right now in this room if it wasn't for antibiotics, and that's simply a truth. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot more people on the planet than there's ever been, and overpopulation is considered a major problem today. So everything has pluses and negatives. But overall, antibiotics is a great blessing, but it's being overused, right? Clearly, because there's a commercial component to that. So the Prophet ﷺ did not come to teach our worldly matters, but there's much wisdom in his statements about many of these things that we can benefit from. One of the things Qadi Iyad says about the Prophet is one of his miracles is that when he was asked about the hawd, he said, zawayahu sawa'un. It's in the Shifa. Its angles are equidistant. Qadi Iyad said, that's not the language of a desert Arab. He said, that's a language of an engineer. And he said, but he was being asked a question that related to architecture, and so he gave an expert's answer. Zawayahu sawa'un. Equidistant angles. So it's a square. So the Prophet ﷺ, in the early period, unfortunately, there's a lot of things that we don't know. We know less about Mecca than we do about Medina. It's unfortunate. Some of the biggest Sahaba and the closest people to him do not relate a lot of hadith. Abu Bakr relates less than 200 hadith. Apparently he burned his hadith. That's his piety. He was just so pious, and he did not want the responsibility, and he knew that there were people out there that had collected what needed to be known. But we have very few hadith from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, even though he spent more time with the Prophet than anybody else. Sayyidina Ali relates just over 500 hadith. Imam Omar relates just over 500 hadith. Small numbers. When you look at some of the other Sahaba, the Mukthirun, Abdullah ibn Umar, Anas ibn Malik. Anas was 10 years old when he came into the service of the Prophet. He served him in his time in Medina. He relates over 2,000 hadith. He's very important. Aisha radiallahu anhu came in early in the Prophet's life. There's debates about her age, and I think she was definitely in her teens when she married him. I think the hadith in al-Bukhari that says that she was 6, if you actually study that seriously, you'll see that there's real problems with that narration. It was probably, and Allah Ta'ala A'lam knows, it was probably 16 when he married her, 19 when she actually consummated the marriage. So that might have just been a loss of the number or something like that. But irrespective of how old she was, the Prophet ﷺ definitely married her at an acceptable age, whether it was 9 or 19. And nobody prior to the modern period ever considered that a blemish on his prophecy. So if you look, for instance, at Washington Irving's book on the Prophet's life, he mentions her age in it, and he makes and he was no friend of the Prophet ﷺ, but all he says is, it's well known that desert women are very precocious. In other words, they mature early. So he doesn't say, look at this, how terrible, she was only 9 years old. Because in America, women got married at 12. It was very common for women in the 19th century to get married at the age of 12. I had one of my teachers married his wife at 13. He was in his 30s in West Africa. That was simply common practice in many parts of the world. Urf is what's dictated here. And in our urf, we extend childhood to a much later period. And so most people at 13 or 14 are still considered children. In the pre-modern world, they were well into adulthood. Well into adulthood. Children were hung in England for horse theft at 7, 8 years old. So the whole idea, and there's a book by Neil Postman, The Disappearance of Childhood, which argues that childhood is largely a modern phenomenon. This idea that most cultures, people were treated as adults very early. In fact, Islam, if anything, extended childhood to about 15. So maturity in the Islamic tradition is about 15. The Prophet did not accept child soldiers. He sent them back. Even though they wanted to fight, he sent them back if they weren't adults, males.